Hello, and welcome to the Scholar Progenium. Today we will be discussing autocannons, everything to do with autocannons. So I will break this video down into a couple of smaller sections, and of course, as usual, those smaller sections will have various subcategories which we will discuss in more detail. So first of all, what I'll discuss is what autocannons can do and the various different flavours of autocannons. Then I will discuss how to make them work in your army. So, without further ado, what can autocannons do? Well, the first and foremost job of autocannons is to pop Eldar skimmers, or skimmers in general. Now, in the beginning of 8th edition, autocannons were generally regarded as a waste of time, no point in taking them. But as 8th edition has developed and gone on further and further, there's been a higher prevalence of units that have invuln saves, units that are sort of toughness 6, and units that are, multi-wound. They're appearing more and more on the battlefield as codexes come out and that kind of thing. So, the autocannon comes in 4 different forms, generally speaking, roughly speaking. So at first you've got your standard autocannon, or what I like to call your guard plinker. Now this is a 48-inch weapon, strength 7, AP -1, and it does 2 flat damage. Now the reason why the autocannon comes in at the point that it does is because a flat damage is extremely valuable in 8th edition. So being able to guarantee that you will do 2 damage if you get a wound through is really good. And the guard plinker is an excellent weapon. If you're a guardsman, autocannons are a really good weapon for you, because you can take them in your squads. You can take loads of them in 10-men squads, so they're not costing you a lot to fit loads in the army. You've got loads of redundant wounds on those autocannons, so they're hard to take care of. So you can keep shooting all game with them, and they can really just plink away, mass fire, hauling lead into the enemy, and just ripping apart skimmers and high wound models. So, getting those in on your guard squads or on your sentinels, really good. And I think personally, and I'm not a guard player, but I play against guard a lot, that sentinels with autocannons are a really good call, because, if you've got a last cannon on your sentinel, you think, that's a cheap way to get a last cannon in. But with that one shot on a guard, half the time you'll be missing at best, So autocannons on a sentinel, it gives you those 2 shots, which means every sentinel is probably going to hit every turn with 1 shot, which means you're just more likely to get that damage through. So, sentinels, guard squads with autocannons, plinking away, really, really good en masse. Then you've got your standard autocannon, your Space Marine autocannon, which you get on your dreadnoughts and that kind of thing. Now it only comes in the twin format, and it always fires 4 shots, a set 4 shots, which is great. You know what you're getting. You're not going to mess up your dice and get 2 shots. You're getting 4 shots. Apart from that, it also does 2 damage, I believe. And again, it's strength 7. And it's AP -1. Following on from that, you've got your Reaper autocannon, and your Reaper autocannon is what you find on Tartarus Terminators, and that is a great little gun to give you Tartarus Terminators, because it's strength 7, AP -1, so it's really good for sort of slamming some rounds into an elite unit just before they charge in with their power fists. Really good at spraying down units from longer range. You've got their storm bolters, so at 24-inch range you found a lot of storm bolter shots plus that Reaper autocannon, and it can even reach out and add in a couple of shots at long range, because it's range 36. All others are range 48, but it's range 36. The disadvantage is it only does 1 damage per shot, but it's on a Terminator. It's good. It's a good solid upgrade. Bit expensive but good. And finally, sort of your most common autocannon is going to be the ones that you find on your Preds, probably your Predators. Now this autocannon Very slightly different, very similar to the twin autocannon, but instead of firing a flat 4 shots, it fires 2d3 shots. Now if you take 2 dice to pick up 2d6 right now and roll them out 10 times, you will get, 4 shots almost every time. It's almost a guaranteed 4, and it's as likely to give you sort of 3 or 2 as it is 5 or 6. But you're not going to have one predator in your army. You're going to have more than one. Firing off these autocannons if you're taking predators with autocannons. So more than likely, you're going to average out 4 shots per predator. And the other advantage of these is still strength 7, still AP -1, but the advantage with this is that it does a flat 3 damage, which is excellent, absolutely excellent. Because when you're shooting at an Eldar vehicle, if you have, let's assume you've got character support in this, you've got a captain giving you reroll 1s, you fire off your 4 shots from a predator, you're going to get 3 hits. You're just going to. You can argue that the dice may not come up, and that is very true, but realistically, you're going to get 3 hits. Then, if you're unlucky, you'll only get 1 wound, because you're wounding on 3s. But if you just average luck, you should get 2 out of those 3 wounds through. Because, you're hitting on 3s, so you should get 2 out of 3 through. And then they've got that 4-up save, so they'll probably pass 1. Realistically, you should get 3 wounds every time with an autocannon, just slamming shots through. 3 hits, 2 wounds, they save 1, you get 3. And that is, very, very consistent. So you can slam 3 wounds onto a 6 wound model. So 1 burst from an autocannon can get you halfway to, destroying an Eldar skimmer, a light Eldar skimmer. Some of the skimmers obviously have more wounds, but, with extra plinking fire from heavy bolters, other, shots around your army, or another autocannon, you can finish off one of those bigger skimmers. But, and if you get lucky, get 2 shots through, you will pop a skimmer. So, they are the ultimate skimmer hunters. Also, those 3 wounds, amazing against, the occasional 3 wound model that you come across. So let's say you come across, it's not often you'll see them, but paladins, Grey Knight paladins, they're expensive, so people don't often take them, but they are good because they get that extra wound over normal Grey Knight terminators. But if an autocannon shot slips through, they'll only have a 3-up save if they're not in cover. You'll just kill one straight up, and the amount of firepower it takes to kill 1 paladin is insane. So just unleashing a quick burst from an autocannon, stripping 1 model off a unit, really, really valuable. Those kinds of moments when you're firing autocannons are the kinds of moments when you think, I'm so glad I took these autocannons in my army, really glad I integrated them into my list. But, there are some significant disadvantages to these autocannons. Now, before I go into those, I will mention one other type of autocannon which you will rarely get the opportunity to use, but I do own this model, and it is absolutely phenomenal. You can see it on a couple of battle reports with Mordian Glory on his channel. And on that note, if you are a Guard player, I would definitely recommend checking out the channel Mordian Glory if you haven't already, because that guy has literally hundreds and hundreds of videos. I'm talking like over 300 videos on Guard tactics and battle reports using the Guard, and you will learn everything you need to know as a Guard player, new or old. So, highly recommend that channel. So, if you are using a Duredo, the advantage is that it is strength 8. And strength 8 just makes a whole world of difference. Now, the Duredo autocannon only does 2 damage, but that is just a worthy trade-off. That flat 2 instead of flat 3 for doing strength 8 shots just opens up a whole new world of targets for the Duredo, because it can then start shooting all of the transports, APCs, that kind of thing, and wound them on 3s. Now, an essential part of shooting anti-tanks, shooting anti-tank weaponry, one of the reasons why I love las cannons is because you don't get that many shots with your big guns, with your artillery support. So you always want them to be wounding, and for me, a 4-up to wound of 50-50 just isn't a good enough guarantee. Now, The Dorado, in this case, is wounding with 3-ups, and it will hammer through transports, rhinos, chimeras, rock grinders, just absolutely anything that's toughness 7. It will just hammer through them so quickly with that flat 2 damage, AP -1, making most vehicles 4-up save, which I know I said you don't want 50-50, but at that point you've got the damage through, and it is a really good unit. If you have a little bit of money to spend and you're looking for a little treat, or you're in a little bit of a rut and you think I want to spice things up a little bit, and you're not, there's no issue amongst your friends with using Forge World, and no one's going to sort of sneer at you if you're using Forge World and that kind of thing, then I would highly recommend going for a Dorado, because I absolutely love using mine. It is phenomenally good. So, what are the disadvantages of autocannons, or the disadvantages of autocannons? So there's basically 2 disadvantages. So the main disadvantage, well actually they're equal in issue for us as Imperium players. So and this counts less for guards, but the first point I'll make is that it's only strength 7. Now that really does restrict it in the main to shooting effectively at light vehicles, toughness 6 at most, all light vehicles, because as I said earlier, you want to be shooting those unfair fights. Now yeah, you've got more shots with the autocannon, but still you want to be shooting and hitting vehicles in a sort of unfair fight kind of thing. You want to be punching straight through. One of the reasons why the Germans, amongst many different things, one of the reasons why the German military, performed quite well in tank warfare in the earlier periods and throughout World War II was because of their high velocity weapons on their vehicles, enabling them to punch through Allied armour. And looking at that historical reference, that was it's always useful to look at historical examples in your 40k gaming. May sound silly, but a lot of those principles, hard learned through men's blood on the battlefield, can be applied to our games, and I'll do more videos on that in the future. But that high punch is something that you really want against anti-armor, and the autocannon just doesn't have it. Yeah, it can hit toughness 7 vehicles and win them on a 4-up, but you just won't have enough in your army for that to be good enough damage dealing potential. So as I said, to effectively damage an enemy vehicle, you need to only, the max they can really be shooting at to guarantee results is toughness 6. So there's only a small bracket of targets that they can effectively shoot at. If they're shooting at infantry and that kind of thing, unless they're elite infantry, multi-wound infantry, you're wasting a lot of potential, because you're paying the points in the main for that flat damage. So if you're shooting at 1-wound models, you are wasting your points with that autocannon. That's just the way it is. So there is, as I said, very few targets where your points are working efficiently for you when you're shooting these autocannons. But on the flip side, the targets that you are shooting, you really need dead, and the autocannons are very good at making them dead. So there is that advantage. They're very good at shooting a small bracket of units. Now, what is the other disadvantage for autocannons? Now, this applies slightly less to guard. Excuse me. But the other disadvantage is that you have very few slots, in inverted commas, to take autocannons in your lists. And what I mean by this is that everything that can take there's not many units that can take autocannons in your army, and to a degree they are being phased out, which I will discuss in more detail in just a second. Not only are there not many slots, not many units that can take those weapons, but the units that can take those weapons are also essential units for carrying your heavy firepower, your real anti-tank, like your las cannons and your missile launchers in part. So every autocannon that you put in is a valuable slot that could well be used to carry a heavier weapon. Now the reason why I say like a valuable slot is because the platforms that you're carrying these autocannons on come at an expensive base cost. You know, a Predator has an expensive base cost, a Dreadnought has an expensive base cost. You're spending about 150 points, give or take, before you buy your weapons, which means that to take multiple autocannons or multiple las cannons, you have an expensive base cost before you start attaching these weapons to the unit, which means you're not going to be able to take a vast amount of anti-tank. And for your heavy anti-tank weapons to work, you need a decent number of those, because you're not putting out that many shots. So you need reliability, you need redundancy, which means that you're not going to have the points to take enough autocannons for them to reliably do their job en masse as an anti-tank weapon, or just to be able to shoot at a variety of targets that aren't just toughness 6 and have that redundancy, so you can be wounding toughness 7 units more effectively. So excuse me. Coming down with a cold here. So let's look in a bit more detail at the units that can hold or carry our autocannons. So we have two main units. We've got our Predators and we've got our Dreadnoughts. So our Preds and our Dreads. So let's have a look at a bit more detail in Predators. So Predators, they'll be shooting with the Predator autocannon. So they're going to get probably 4 shots, but it's 2d3, so it's not 100% reliable. Could be a bit better, could be a bit worse. Now, the advantage of the Predator is, it's fast, it's mobile. You're going to be able to hit anything on the board with that 48-inch range, plus, the 12-inch move of the Predator if you're Blood Angels, or, Space Marines, whatever. And it's going to have the heavy bolters on it, which will top up the autocannon fire. And one Predator, a good burst with some heavy bolters, will reliably do 4 wounds to an Eldar skimmer, and with a bit of luck will just pop one. With that 6 heavy bolter shots, you'll usually get 1 wound through, but you might get 2. And if you with a little bit of extra fire from other units nearby, just a little bit of plinking from storm bolters on rhinos, that kind of thing, you can finish it off. So it's a really effective unit for taking on a skimmer, but it is expensive for that. Your Eldar skimmer is not costing anywhere near as much as a Predator, and that Predator is vulnerable, and you don't get that many Predators in your army because you're buying a tank, so they're expensive to a degree, and you want to have a variety of models in your collection, so you're not just going to have loads of tanks. Having said that, I own, I believe, around 22 Rhino/Predator chassis vehicles, but that's me. I wouldn't necessarily recommend going down that route, but it is very fun. So those autocannons are going to be on a few models, which means those autocannons can be targeted, focused down, because they're not spread across your whole army. They're on 2 or 3 models in your army, which means that, especially with Eldar, they can deep strike down, focus those autocannon units, because they're going to know they're dangerous. And we will discuss how to make autocannons work with that in mind in a bit more detail later on in the video, because that actually does play into our hands. So let's look at Dreads. Now, Dreads have the same disadvantage as Predators. That base cost for around 150 points is going to mean that you're not going to have that many in your army. But with Dreadnoughts, you can get a lot more autocannons for your points. Because if you take a Rifleman Dread, that's 8 autocannon shots, 2 twin autocannons. Amazing. Really going to sling some lead down range. Really, that's going to tear up a skimmer, just no problem whatsoever. But, it's only toughness 7 and it's only 8 wounds with 3 up save. Now, you will almost definitely be able to get a Dreadnought in cover with the current, after the FAQ and that kind of thing. Shouldn't be a problem at all. Even a couple in a little firebase, even 3 in a, medium-sized ruin with a captain just spraying away. That is a ridiculously effective firebase if you're taking on Eldar. For around 550, 600 points, you can take, to be fair, it's going to be closer to 650, 700, but, if you're willing to invest that much of your army, you can have a firebase, between 600 700 points that's going to have 3 dreadnoughts with twin autocannons on both arms, with a captain, rerolling monster hits, just absolutely spraying stuff down. And for a decent investment in a shooty army, that is a ridiculously powerful fire base. But it wouldn't be your only fire base, and I'll discuss that in a bit more detail later. Now, one of the things that I must underline with dreads, and this is absolutely essential that you take this point away from this video, is the fact that it looks to me that dreads, rifleman dreads with twin autocannons, are being phased out. So if you look in your codex currently as a Space Marine player, you will see that you do not have the option for a rifleman dread. You can take one twin autocannon and a close combat weapon. Now, you can use your index currently, that is not a problem, that unit is still available to you. But Games Workshop have confirmed, written confirmation, and I can't remember where I read this, but that they will be looking basically to focus on the development of units that are in codexes and not in indexes. Now, you can take from that, and I'm paraphrasing, and you can take from that what you will. But if you're going to start thinking to yourself, right, I need to invest in some autocannon wielding units, I need to get a little autocannon fire base in my army, or start experimenting with some autocannons, and you start buying rifleman dreads, and we're sort of a comfortable year into 8th edition, and there could well be a big chapter, a big FAQ coming up soon, or if you listen to this video a few months from when it's published, it could have just come out, and rifleman dreads, I think it's unlikely they won't be available, but there's a chance in years to come that they will be phased out. So that is just a risk. So Games Workshop are encouraging you to take just one autocannon, and that is viable if you've got 3 dreads, because then you've got your fists, and if the Eldar, deep strike in, drop down to try and target those models, and they don't blow them all up, which, there's a good chance they would, but if they don't, you can run in and, punch them with your fists and rip those skimmers apart very easily with your dreadnoughts. So there is that counter-assault option there, and that is a very viable option to take with your dreadnoughts. So you've got your 2 platforms, you've got your predators with autocannons and heavy bolters, and you've got your dreadnoughts with either, an autocannon or 2 autocannons. And the Preds are the more expensive option per autocannon, and the Dreads are the cheaper way to get your autocannons into the army. Now, before I move on to the next section, how to make them work, I will just take a second to discuss a new unit in 40k, which is the Armiger Helverin. Now, I'm looking at this model, and I don't like to speculate in my videos. All of my videos, everything that I say is based on experience, in the field, so to speak. In that, everything that I tell you is a tried and tested tactic that I have used in many, many games. I will not advise you to take a loadout or a unit, or try a tactic or a set piece on this channel unless I have tried it out on multiple occasions and I know it works, that it's something that you can easily put into your army and get results with, relatively quickly. So this is, I underline, take it with a pinch of salt, because this is not something I have done, but I'm looking at these Armiger Helverins and I'm thinking, right, okay, so you can take 1 to 3 in a unit, and they split up, so they act as individual models once you start the game. They're 170 points base. They're very close in points to a Predator with autocannons. 174 if you take a heavy stubber, and you can take a melter on there, which sort of overcomes the issue of the autocannon, which that a unit wielding an autocannon is a waste of points for taking on proper tanks and proper heavy vehicles. So you've got that melter gun, if you get under 14-inch movement, and they can move and shoot heavy weapons, so they're autocannons without a penalty to hit. You can run up, shoot with the autocannons, and melter anything that gets too close, or anything that's, an opportunistic target. So you overcome your sort of not able to pop tanks disadvantage. They've got that 5-up invuln, like a knight. They're hitting on 3s the same as a pred. As I said, 14-inch movements are 2 inches more than a pred. And they're wielding two they're called armature autocannons, but they're effectively predator autocannons. They've got a 60-inch range, which really good. But apart from that, 2d3 shot, strength 7, AP -1, flat 3 damage, just the same. So they're going to perform the same as a predator in terms of firepower. But as I said, they overcome, in my eyes, the disadvantages which I have identified through my experience over 20 plus years of using Blood Angels, which is autocannons take up valuable slots and they're expensive to get in your army per autocannon you can take because of the high base cost of the models which can carry them. But the Helverins, they overcome that because for only a few points more you can carry 2 of the autocannons, which is the same as a Dread. If you're putting out more base damage than the Dread autocannons, you basically firing the same shots. You can move way faster than Dreads, so you're faster than those units. You're putting out way more firepower, and you've got the option to take a melter, which can overcome really heavy armor very effectively. So I'm thinking, if you are a Space Marine player and you don't currently have autocannons in your army, but you're thinking, or you're a Guard player, but with Guard you've got a lot more options, cheap options for autocannons. But if you are an Imperium player in general, and especially a Space Marine player, and you're thinking, I really need to start getting some autocannons in my list, there's more and more vehicles that are appearing on the tabletop in my local war club, in my local games workshop. My mate's got an Eldar army now, or they're dusting off their old Eldar armies now that they're really good again, and this kind of thing. And you really need to up your autocannon game. Helverins, for the price as well. The price of a box of Helverins versus, when you're getting 4, effectively Predator autocannons there because you've got 2 Helverins in a box. You'd have to buy 4 Predators for the same amount of autocannons. Yes, your Predators have the heavy bolters, but your Helverins have a heavy stubber or a melter. So, pound for pound in terms of actual money that you're spending and points in your list, the Helverins are looking like, if it's a new thing that you're adding to your army and you don't already have, really, really viable choice that I would seriously consider. Obviously, you've got to take, you might have to spend 3 command points to take them as a heavy detachment, or heavy support attachment, or might have to wiggle your list in another way. So they are going to have a bigger outlay of points if you've got a character with them, or if you sacrifice command points if you go unbound to take them, which really bad idea. There's a variety of ways, a variety of means, which means that the cost will be greater than I have said initially. But, looks like a really, really viable option, something to consider, definitely something I would research more if I were you. So, now that we've discussed all the possible platforms and how you should be taking your autocannons, let's look at how to make them work in detail. So, in this, what I'll be looking at is the types of armies that should be taking them, and that they will synergize with, the units that you can use with autocannons, how you will synergize them with certain lists, or the sacrifices that you'll have to make if you take them in a type of list that isn't necessarily synergized with these units. How to sort of set them up and deploy them, how to balance the book, so to speak, how to balance out the cost of them in your list, and sort of how to use them effectively alongside other units to sort of guarantee destruction of the enemy. So, how to make autocannons work in your armies? Well, first of all, the armies that these weapons really naturally synergize with are heavily armoured armies and heavy shooty armies. So what I mean by this is if you've got a lot of armour, vehicles on the battlefield, or you're just very shooty, if you've got a brigade, loads of devastators, or you've got an armour brigade, loads of rhinos, which is something I occasionally run, which is very effective, very balanced list. But they synergize very nicely with these armies because a shooty army will have a lot of additional firepower, which will fill in the gaps for the autocannons. So if the autocannons are having to shoot at something that's toughness 7, you can fire other weapons that you've got around your army to top up the autocannons, and likewise your other weapons, if they're not functioning that well, the autocannons will top up the damage that those weapons do very reliably, because they're going to be doing a flat 2 or a flat 3 damage per hit that goes through. So they fit really nicely with a shooty army. The other reason why they fit very nicely with a shooty army is because they can perform a specific function within that shooty army, so they can have a specific role. So you say, I've got my last cannon units for shooting my heavy armor, I've got my assault cannon, twin assault cannon, Daka units for shooting troops, and I've got my autocannons for shooting like transports and stuff in the middle. So you can have a nice balanced spread of damage, a nice balanced damage curve and spread of damage in your army. And it's a valuable investment, and it's not those units, you're taking a lot of predators anyway, you're taking a lot of dreadnoughts anyway, because it's a heavy armoured list or a shooty list. So it's not a sacrifice in slots, because you'll have lots of slots if you're taking a heavily armoured or shooty army that can take last cannons and that kind of thing. So you're not worried about having less anti-armour, because you've got those slots and you can afford to use a few of them for autocannons for valuable variation in your firepower, to be efficient with your firepower. So you're always shooting stuff at optimal targets. So they're the kind of lists that they're going to fit naturally into. Now, if they don't fit naturally into your list, or even if they do fit naturally into your list and you're using that type of list, then you need to balance your points very carefully. So I'll discuss that in just 1 second. But first, what I'll say is, if it's not a synergized army, so if you're taking quite an assault heavy force, like you've got a unit of Terminators, you've got a big 12-man unit of Death Company, you've got various other assaulty units and that kind of thing, and you want to get some autocannons in there, what you have to recognise is that you will need to take another fire support unit, probably, even if it's just a Land Raid with 4 last cannons and a Razorback with 2 last cannons or something like that, because those autocannons on their own are not in an all-comers list going to do the damage to the long range artillery units that the enemy will probably have effectively to soften up the enemy lines before your assault units get in, and your assault units will just end up getting slammed by these units at close range. And even if your assault units are going for those units, I can just tell you from experience, you won't get there reliably enough, because of screening, and good players will be able to stop you getting there, and sometimes you just have to, with assault units, just smash the enemy and tear them apart and not take on the targets you would ideally take on, and just keep your momentum up. And a good player will force you to play that way, where you're not going for optimal targets with your close combat units, which means you need to have the long range units to back them up to shoot at the targets that they're protecting with screens and movement and that clever movement and that kind of thing. So you will have to sacrifice points from your assault units or from your transports or somewhere in your list to make sure you've got some heavy firepower to support these autocannons, and that is all I will say against a list that doesn't naturally synergize and doesn't have the slots to just take autocannons without taking too much of a hit to the heavy firepower. You've got to squeeze it in somewhere. So let's look at how to balance the books, how to look at our points in our lists. Well, what you need to do as a good rule of thumb, I feel, is take about 30% of your budget for last cannons and missile launchers, mainly last cannons obviously. Take about 30% of your budget and spend that on autocannons. But you will also need to increase your budget for heavy weapons in your list generally by about 50%. So let me give you some example numbers here. So let's say you usually take 3 Predators with last cannons and heavy bolters in your list, plus a Razorback with a last cannon. You like 8 last cannons in your list, and you love slamming those last cannon rounds. That is a really good amount of last cannons to have on a list. And do check out my last cannon video to find out more about balancing the last cannons in your list, when you get the time, if you haven't already watched it. So what you're going to do is you're going to say, right, so I've spent about 600-700 points maybe a little more on my last cannon support in my list. So what you don't want to take away too many of those last cannons. You're still going to need them, in an all-comers list, in tourneys. Yes, you might be facing more Elder these days in tourneys, but you're also facing more Knights. You need that strength 9 just as much as you always did. So what you're going to do is you're going to take out of that roughly, round it down, there's about 700 points there, 750 points. You're going to roughly take about 30% of that, so let's say about 250 points, and you're going to take that away from your last cannon budget, so you're going to spend about 250 points less on last cannon wielding units. So you might just have 2 Predators with last cannons heavy bolters and lose a Pred, lose a Razorback, something like that. And then what you're going to do is you're going to increase your remaining budget by about 50%. So let's say you've got about 450 points left, 400 points left that you've spent on last cannons. So 50% of 400 is 200 points. And remember, there's a lot of variation in the units that you're going to take, so this is just a very rough outline, but I have found over, the whole of 8th edition, I've been trying out loads of units. I own 3 Predators with autocannons. I've tried out loads of different combinations, and I found that this is the rough guidelines that you want to be looking when you're initially writing your lists, and then obviously adjust to your own tastes as you play and get experience. So you're going to increase your budget for your heavy support by about your remaining budget by about 50%. So you lost 30% of your original budget, and you increase the remaining budget by about 50%. So you'll go up to about, if you've got about 400 points, about 600 points left, and you say, right, that's a good ballpark for how much I should be spending back on last cannons again. That's how much I should be taking away from my other units, my assault units, my troops, my fast units, that kind of thing. That's how many points I should be taking away from the rest of my list to put back into my heavy support to make sure the rest of my list is properly supported, because you are taking points away from the assault units and putting it back into heavy support. You're spending more points overall on your heavy support options in your list as a whole, but it is a good return at about that level because it supports your other units in your list better, so they can actually do their jobs effectively. So it's a worthy investment. So at that point, you might buy back a Razorback with twin last cannons. So you've got now 2 Predators with autocannons that you've bought out of the sort of 50% that you saved, and you've got 2 Predators with last cannons out of the 4 last cannon wielding units that you originally had. Then you've topped those 2 Predators up with just a Razorback with an extra last cannon. Now you can do that in a variety of ways. Obviously there's multiple units. You might have Land Raiders in there, you might have Devastators in there with loads of last cannons. There's multiple units, but what I am saying is roughly you take 30% of your original heavy support budget that you would take in your list after you've built it normally, or your auto includes, spend that on autocannon wielding units, then take about 50% of your remaining points of your heavy support, however much the value of that is, take that away from the rest of your list and invest it back into heavy support to make sure that the rest of your list can do their job properly, and your heavy support has enough heavy weapons to do its job properly. There's no point bouncing 2 last cannons off a balanced enemy list, because 2 last cannons is basically going to do nothing. You'll get 1 shot through a turn, if you're lucky. You still need that heavy support in volume because you're not getting many shots. So what I've discussed is the types of lists which these units that are carrying autocannons tie into nicely, how to integrate them into lists where they wouldn't naturally synergize, and how to make it more synergetic and still work efficiently and effectively, and sort of how to balance your books, what kind of points investments you want to be looking at in a 2,000 point list when you're taking your autocannons. And sort of the thing to take away from that was the fact that you have to acknowledge, you have to be willing to accept that you will have to take points away from a bit from your heavy support, and a bit from the rest of your list. You'll have to take a little bit of an investment away from the rest of your list and away from your heavy support units, your artillery units, and invest it into this third section, the autocannon wielding units. Now, Now you've spent this and you've balanced your books and you've got a nice balanced list and you've not taken too much away from anything, and you've got these autocannons that can do a really essential niche job in your army, really make your army effective as an all-comers, all-takers list, because you can now take on those Eldar which are appearing more and more frequently. You can slam away multi-wound units, but you've not invested too much that they're spending a lot of time shooting at units that they're not efficiently shooting, like 1 wound models or toughness 8 models. So you've balanced your list perfectly. Great. Now what do you do? Well, we're on the battlefield. Now, you're going to use these autocannon units as essentially an anti-skimmer / anti-multi-wound megadeath unit force. And what you'll do is you'll deploy them together in almost like, not a hunting team, but like a fire support base. So you might have your 3 dreadnoughts, all with twin autocannons and a captain. You might have 2 predators with twin autocannons and 2 dreadnoughts with twin last cannon missile launch. There's a million different units you could take. And if you guard, obviously, you're going to have loads of infantrymen with autocannons, and if you're taking a brigade, sentinels with autocannons, makes those sentinels not so much of attacks. And what you're going to do is you're going to deploy them in the centre of your force, and that's really essential, because think about the types of units that are going to be coming at and specifically focusing on these units. Well, as you're taking them predominantly to take on and destroy Eldar skimmers and deep striking skimmers, those are the things, especially if you're playing against Dark Eldar, that are going to deep strike in, Harlequins, shoot at the board, melt a pistol you, or whatever. So what you need is, you kind of need a screen, but kind of not a screen at the same time, because your screen will be too easy to kill if it's just an infantry screen. So what you do is you deploy them in the middle of your force, because first of all, what that means is when they deep strike in or come right into your face, to target and destroy those units, because they know those units are a real threat to them as an Eldar player. They fear autocannons. They are well aware of the power of autocannons against their units. They will be forced to be within range of basically most of your army, because whatever deployment you set up, if you're an Imperium player, most of your units' minimum range is 24 inches, almost all of your weapons apart from melters, and within 12 inches, most of the time, just with the types of weapons that Imperium units take across the board, you'll be getting rapid fire, extra bonuses, you'll be getting your melters in, really close range, you get better melter shots, shotguns get better if you've got shotgun units. That's the way Imperium weapons work. They're relatively long range, decent high mid-range weapons that get better the closer you get. So if they deep strike in the middle, that means both of your flanks can pour fire in to the centre. If you put your Preds and you think, I'll keep them safe on one flank, you're not keeping them safe. What you're meaning is that what you're doing is putting them in a position where they can more securely deep strike in, and not all of your firepower will be able to respond to the threat, because some of it will be out of range and some of it won't be firing optimally because it will be at its max range instead of its rapid fire range or higher power range. So you need them in the centre. Now the other reason you need them in the centre is because of counter assault. So they deep strike in, and one really good way to take out skimmers and that kind of thing is to assault them. If you've got power fists, or if you're Blood Angels and you've got like maces in, if you've got power maces, which you don't see on the battlefield that much, but +2 strength makes you strength 6. If you're a Blood Angel, +1 to wound means you're wounding skimmers on 3s with sergeants. Company veterans, one of my favourite little opportunistic assault units with power maces, are absolutely hilarious, because a 2-man unit, if you take 2 power maces on there, which is expensive, considering they will die, you'll get 6 attacks hitting on 3s, wounded on 3s against skimmers. They are an amazing anti-skimmer counter assault unit. Even one guy and one with a chainsword will still do probably 2 wounds to a skimmer. Really, really good. So what you're going to do, having considered all of these points, is you are going to deploy them in the middle with a undeployed screen of units, a counter assault screen of units. And what I would recommend for this is Razorbacks with either heavy bolters or if you're willing to spend the points, and I would recommend it because it really does exponentially increase the effectiveness of this little team, is Assault Cannon Razorbacks. Really, really good. And as a Blood Angels player, one of the things I would say as a caveat to this entire video is that when you can take autocannons, assault cannons are basically better because they do more DACA and they're still strength 6. You don't get to sort of fight an unfair fight in that you're not wounding them on 3s, you are wounding them on 4s, and the autocannon does have that advantage of wounding on 3s, but the assault cannon fires out 12 shots, so it doesn't matter. You will strim 2 to 3 wounds reliably off a skimmer with a burst of assault cannon. I can just tell you that from experience. Just a double assault cannon, twin assault cannon, spray off 12 shots, you'll do 2 to 3 wounds, just the way it is. So what you do is you have, let's say, 2 predators or 2 dreads with twin assault cannons, your little auto cannons, your little autocannon fire base. Then you have a Razorback or 2 with assault cannons or heavy bolters and counter assault units in there. So go check out my assault marine video, and I tell you for about over 30 minutes how to effectively use assault marines to clinch opportunistic targets, turn the battle in your favour. They'll be sort of hidden as little juicy nuggets of tactical flexibility across your list if you take assault marines and you sort of use them in the way I've advised in my other video, and they're perfect in this role. They can opportunistically counter assault, finish off an Eldar skimmer or take on an Eldar skimmer after they've deep striked in. And that's basically it, because they will deep strike in, you will slam into them with your autocannons, finish off anything that has just avoided death with your assault cannons, because you'll get 2 to 3 wounds, and then you've got you'll have hopped your troops out, your sacrificial troops, charge them in, and finish off anything that was in the transports. And you've got they're deep struck into the centre, so any troops that fall out can just be shot by rapid firing storm bolters, scouts, whatever the hell you want. There'll be characters falling out right next to your lines. You can run assault marines into them, weak characters and chop them up. You'll have your characters nearby, you could opportunistically assassinate their characters because they'll be dropping out right in the middle of your army, right in the middle of your field. So what you kind of want to do to underline this sort of final tie together point about how to make your units effective is you want to prepare for how they will try and counter these units. They are going to try and counter these units. If you take a autocannon fire support team in your army, anti-skimmer team in your army, they will try and counter it. That will be one of their priorities. And you need to deploy in such a way that you can counter their counter, a second wave, effectively. And that should, by turn 3, give you the upper hand. Their assault's fallen flat on its face, or at least you've trod your ground, because they've come in with a really heavy deep strike hit across the board, wrecked loads of your stuff, but you've responded in kind and brought the game back. So it's a balanced game, and now it's your turn to start deep striking in Termes, deep striking in Death Company, and finishing them off, purging the Xenos, and fighting for the Imperium. So thank you very much for your time. That has been everything to do with autocannons. This should set you off on the right path. Of course, your own experience is your number one tool in winning games, so hopefully I have pointed you in the right direction. I hope you've got something out of this, whether you're a new player or a veteran of the Long War. And that reminds me, one other thing, Chaos Devastators can take autocannons, and that is an excellent choice. So if you are Chaos, autocannons on your Devastator equivalents, I can't remember the name of the unit, really, really effective. And that's the final thing I will say. Thank you very much for your time. Schola Progenium. Goodbye.